Imagine Gilligan's Island reimagined in the Wild West, but so blatantly derivative that it ranked as the 59th worst event in television history. Bob Denver's forgotten Western flop featured a tragic country singer's theme song, episodes that literally fell into the public domain, and a tornado effect so laughably bad it's considered possibly the worst in TV history. This wasn't just a failed show, it was television's most shameless copycat. Fact 1. Gilligan Goes West, the ultimate copycat show. If you thought Dusty's Trail looked familiar, that's because it was basically Gilligan's Island dressed up in cowboy hats and boots. Creator Sherwood Schwartz, the same man behind Gilligan's Island, took his successful formula and transplanted it wholesale into the 1880s Wild West, creating what television researchers Tim Brooks and Earl Marsh would later call a derivative flop. The parallels weren't just similar, they were almost identical, right down to the group of 7 characters. Bob Denver traded his sailor hat for a cowboy hat to play Dusty, the bumbling assistant to the wagon master who constantly got everyone into trouble, just like his character Gilligan had done on the deserted island. Forrest Tucker stepped into the role of Mr. Callahan, the wagon master who served as the skipper equivalent, even calling Dusty his little pal instead of little buddy. The millionaire couple, the Howells, became the wealthy banker, Mr. Brookhaven, and his society wife. The professor character transformed into Andy, a book-smart civil engineer. Ginger, the movie star, became Lulu McQueen, a dance hall girl, while Mary Ann, the farm girl, was replaced by Betsy, a schoolteacher who still embodied that innocent, wholesome quality. Even the basic premise mirrored the original show, with the group separated from their wagon train and lost in the wilderness, trying week after week to find their way back to civilization, only to have Dusty's incompetence foil every attempt. The creators didn't even try to hide what they were doing, essentially admitting they were remaking Gilligan's Island in a different setting. This shameless copying became so obvious to audiences and critics that it contributed significantly to the show's failure, as viewers felt they were watching a pale imitation rather than something new and original. Fact 2. Bob Denver's favorite role. Despite the disaster, despite Dusty's Trail being universally panned by critics and canceled after just 1 season, Bob Denver shocked everyone by calling it his favorite show to perform and describing it as my best year in front of a camera. This seems almost unbelievable given that the show was ridiculed as a cheap knockoff and has been largely forgotten by television history, but Denver had his reasons for feeling this way. By the time Dusty's Trail came around in 1973, Denver was carrying some emotional baggage from his previous television experiences, particularly his frustration with how CBS had handled Gilligan's Island. In his own words, Denver explained that at that time he still had some resentment about how CBS threw them in the dumper, and he had also worked on another show called The Good Guys with Herb Edelman that critics dismissed by saying it should have just been called Guys. Denver said that Gilligan's Island reruns were on television more than news anchor Walter Cronkite, but the royalties had dried up, leaving him feeling undervalued despite the show's continued popularity. When Dusty's Trail came along, Denver made a conscious decision to approach it differently, telling himself to just enjoy the ride and not worry about whether it would be a hit or not. He decided that if the show succeeded, that would be wonderful, but if it didn't work out, then it simply wasn't meant to be. This relaxed, pressure-free attitude allowed Denver to genuinely have fun during the production, making it a personally fulfilling experience, regardless of the show's commercial failure or critical reception, proving that sometimes an actor's favorite role isn't always the most successful one. Fact 3. Networks rejected it. Syndication only. The concept for Dusty's Trail was considered so unoriginal and derivative that none of the major television networks would agree to pick it up, which was actually quite embarrassing for creator Sherwood Schwartz given his previous success with Gilligan's Island. Instead of airing on NBC, CBS, or ABC, like most shows of that era, Dusty's Trail was forced into first-run syndication, meaning it was sold directly to individual television stations across the country, rather than being broadcast through a network. This syndication route came with serious financial consequences because syndicated shows typically had much smaller budgets than network programs. And Dusty's Trail was no exception to this harsh reality. The extremely limited budget showed up in almost every aspect of the production, from the sets that looked obviously fake and surreal to the special effects that were laughably bad, even by 1970s standards. Critics and viewers alike noticed the cheap production values immediately, with one reviewer describing the show as being shot through with cheap opportunism and cheaper production values that made it not only unfunny but also embarrassing to watch. The show often relied on obvious studio sets rather than location shooting, giving everything an artificial, low-budget appearance that stood in stark contrast to the more polished look of network westerns from the same period. This lack of network support and the resulting budget constraints meant that Dusty's Trail never had a real chance to succeed, as it looked and felt like a bargain basement knockoff from the very first episode, reinforcing the perception that this was a show nobody wanted to make except the people desperate enough to try. Fact 4. The worst tornado in television history. In an episode titled Nothing to Crow About that aired in January of 1974, Dusty's Trail featured what one viewer described as possibly the worst replica of a tornado in television history. And watching the episode today proves that assessment wasn't exaggerated in the slightest. The episode's plot involved Dusty's pet raven stealing the group's map while a tornado was approaching their location, forcing them to seek shelter in a cave that Dusty discovers just as the storm hits. When the tornado finally appeared on screen, viewers were treated to what looked like a hand-drawn, scribbled sketch of a funnel cloud that had been crudely superimposed over the finished film in post-production. The effect was so obviously artificial and poorly executed that it became immediately clear someone had literally drawn a tornado shape and placed it over the scene without any attempt to make it look realistic or blend naturally with the live-action footage. This wasn't a case of special effects that simply looked dated by modern standards, but rather an effect that looked terrible even by the standards of 1970s television, especially when compared to other shows from that era that managed to create convincing natural disasters with limited technology. The tornado looked more like a child's crayon drawing than an actual weather phenomenon, with its scribbly, uneven lines and complete lack of depth or movement that would suggest real wind or rotation. This embarrassing special effect became a perfect symbol of the show's overall production quality and served as a visual reminder of just how limited the budget really was, demonstrating that the producers were willing to air something that clearly wasn't ready rather than spending the money needed to create a convincing storm sequence. Fact 5. Ranked 59th worst television event ever. Dusty's Trail achieved a dubious honor decades after it went off the air when it was ranked as the 59th worst event in television history in a 2004 book by David Hofstede titled What Were They Thinking? The 100 Dumbest Events in Television History. This book examined the most ill-conceived, poorly executed, and bewildering decisions in the history of American television. And Dusty's Trail earned its spot on this infamous list specifically for being such a blatant and unoriginal clone of Gilligan's Island without bringing anything new or creative to the table. The book placed the show in the company of other notorious television disasters and embarrassments, including various scandals, failed experiments, and shows that have become legendary for all the wrong reasons over the decades. What made Dusty's Trail particularly notable on this list was that it represented Hollywood's complete lack of imagination at its worst, as creator Sherwood Schwartz essentially ripped off his own successful formula and transplanted it to a different setting without making any meaningful changes to the characters, storylines, or basic premise. The book's author specifically called out how the show was Gilligan's Island in the Old West, even down to starring Bob Denver himself, making it impossible for audiences to see it as anything other than a cheap imitation. Being ranked 59th out of 100 might not sound like the absolute bottom of the barrel, but it still meant that Dusty's Trail was considered worse than 92% of all the programming decisions examined in the book, securing its legacy as one of television's most regrettable creative choices and a cautionary tale about the dangers of relying too heavily on a proven formula without adding anything original. Fact 6. Accidentally lost to public domain. In what can only be described as a massive administrative failure, Several episodes of Dusty's Trail were never properly copyrighted, causing them to lapse into the public domain and making them some of the last regular television series episodes produced after 1963 to fall into this unusual legal category. The reasons for this copyright oversight remain unclear even decades later, but the consequences were significant and immediate for the show's distribution and availability. When a television show or movie enters the public domain, it means that anyone can legally copy, distribute, or sell it without paying licensing fees or royalties to the original creators or production company, which is exactly what happened with roughly 17 of the 26 episodes that were produced. This copyright mishap turned Dusty's Trail into a staple of discount DVD bins at dollar stores and budget retailers across America, where companies could package and sell the episodes for as little as $1 without owing anything to the original producers. The show became widely available through these cheap DVD releases, on public domain streaming services, and even on the Internet Archive, where anyone could watch or download the episodes completely free of charge. This widespread availability through budget releases actually gave Dusty's Trail a strange second life that it never would have achieved through normal syndication or official DVD releases, as curious viewers and Bob Denver fans could easily pick up episodes without making any significant financial investment. The irony is that this copyright failure probably introduced more people to Dusty's Trail over the years than ever watched it during its original 1973 to 74 broadcast run, though whether that's a good thing or not depends entirely on your tolerance for low-budget television westerns. Fact 7. Petticoat Junction Reunion. Sisters never met in a strange twist of television history. Two of Dusty's Trail's female stars, Janine Riley and Laurie Saunders, had both played Bradley's sisters on the popular rural sitcom Petticoat Junction, but they had never actually appeared together on that show, despite playing siblings. Riley portrayed Billy Joe Bradley during the first 2 seasons of Petticoat Junction before leaving in 1965 to pursue a movie career, and almost immediately after her departure, Saunders joined the cast to play a completely different Bradley sister, Bobby Joe, starting in the show's 3rd season and staying until the series ended in 1970. This meant that even though they were both part of the Petticoat Junction family and played sisters in the same fictional household, Riley and Saunders never shared a single scene together or even worked on the show at the same time. When they were both cast in Dusty's Trail several years later, it marked the first time these two actresses actually worked together, despite their shared history on Petticoat Junction, creating an unexpected reunion that never happened on the show where they had supposedly been sisters. Saunders later commented on this coincidence, noting how interesting it was to finally work alongside Riley on a different show after they had been part of the same television family without ever meeting. On Dusty's Trail, Riley played Lulu McQueen, the dance hall girl character, while Saunders played Betsy, the sweet schoolteacher, giving them the chance to finally build a working relationship and friendship that their overlapping time on Petticoat Junction had never allowed, even though both women had become closely associated with that beloved rural comedy series throughout their careers. Fact 8. Country Singer's Tragic Theme Song. The theme song for Dusty's Trail was performed by country music singer Mel Street, whose connection to the show through Metro Media Records seemed like a natural fit at the time, but his story would end in tragedy just a few years after the series went off the air. Street was a rising star in the country music world during the early 1970s, having scored several top 20 hits on the Billboard country charts and building a devoted fan base through his heartfelt performances and extensive touring schedule. He recorded the Dusty's Trail theme song in 1973 as part of his association with Metro Media Country, the record label that was owned by the same company producing the television series, which made the collaboration a convenient business arrangement for everyone involved. Street continued to find success in country music throughout the mid-70s with songs like I Met a Friend of Yours Today and If I Had a Cheating Heart. And by 1978, he had signed a major contract with Mercury Records that seemed to promise even greater success and potential superstardom. However, Street had struggled with clinical depression and alcoholism throughout much of his career, and the pressures of constant touring being away from his family, and the demands of the music industry took an increasingly heavy toll on his mental health over the years. On October 21, 1978, which was his 45th birthday, Mel Street took his own life with a self-inflicted gunshot, shocking the country music community and his many fans. That same day, a new single of his called Just Hanging On debuted on the country charts, creating a heartbreaking irony that his career continued even after his death. Fact 9, called Little Pal instead of Little Buddy. Throughout the entire run of Dusty's Trail, Wagon Master Mr. Callahan consistently referred to his bumbling assistant Dusty as Little Pal, which was such a transparent variation of the skipper's famous Little Buddy nickname for Gilligan that it became one of the most obvious examples of how shamelessly the show copied its predecessor. This nickname choice perfectly illustrated the creators' approach to the entire series, where they changed just enough details to technically make it a different show while keeping everything fundamentally identical to what had worked on Gilligan's Island years earlier. The skipper's affectionate term, Little Buddy, had become one of the most recognizable and beloved catchphrases from Gilligan's Island, representing the warm but exasperated relationship between the commanding ship's captain and his well-meaning but incompetent first mate, who constantly caused disasters through his clumsiness and poor judgment. By simply swapping Buddy for Pal, the writers of Dusty's Trail were clearly hoping to recreate that same dynamic and tap into the nostalgia audiences felt for the original show, but the change was so minimal that it actually had the opposite effect and reminded viewers they were watching an inferior copy rather than something original. Forrest Tucker delivered the line with the same mix of frustration and fondness that Alan Hale Jr. had used when calling Bob Denver Little Buddy on Gilligan's Island, and Denver responded with the same sheepish, apologetic demeanor that had defined his earlier character, making the parallel impossible to miss or ignore. This barely disguised copying extended to virtually every aspect of the relationship between Callahan and Dusty, from their body language to their comic timing to the way their conversations played out in scene after scene. Fact 10. 4 episodes became a movie flop. In August of 1976, more than 2 years after Dusty's Trail had been canceled, someone made the questionable decision to edit 4 episodes of the series together into a theatrical film called The Wackiest Wagon Train in the West, in what appears to have been a desperate attempt to salvage something from the failed television show. The 4 episodes that were stitched together were Tomahawk Territory, Horse of Another Color, There Is Nothing Like a Dame, and The Not-So-Magnificent 7, which were simply played one after another with minimal editing to connect them into anything resembling a coherent feature-length movie. This compilation approach meant that audiences who paid money to see the film in theaters were essentially watching 4 separate television episodes with 4 completely different storylines that had no connection to each other, making for an extremely disjointed and confusing viewing experience that felt more like a marathon of reruns than an actual movie. The film maintained all the cheap production values and low-budget special effects from the original television series, which looked even worse on a big theater screen than they had on small home television sets, and the lack of any overarching narrative or character development made it feel like exactly what it was: a cheap cash grab attempting to squeeze a few more dollars out of a property that audiences had already firmly rejected. The Wackiest Wagon Train in the West bombed completely at the box office and failed to generate any renewed interest in the Dusty's Trail series, and it quickly disappeared from theaters without making any significant impact whatsoever, proving once again that no amount of repackaging could make this failed show appealing to audiences who had made it clear they weren't interested. Fact 11. Planned 30 episodes, only made 26. Dusty's Trail was originally planned to produce 30 episodes for its first season, but the show was canceled so abruptly and unceremoniously that production shut down after completing only 26 episodes, leaving 4 episodes that were scripted or planned but never actually filmed or broadcast. This mid-production cancellation meant that the show didn't even get the chance to complete its intended first season run, which was an extremely rare occurrence in television at that time, and demonstrated just how poorly the series was performing with both audiences and the stations that had agreed to air it in syndication. The cancellation came down in March of 1974 after the show had been on the air for only 6 months, from September of 1973 through that final broadcast date, giving it one of the shortest runs of any Western comedy series in television history. Most television shows, even unsuccessful ones, were typically given the courtesy of completing their initial production order before being canceled. But Dusty's Trail was performing so badly that the decision was made to pull the plug immediately, rather than waste time and money producing the remaining 4 episodes that had been promised. The 26 episodes that were completed represented roughly 87% of the planned first season, meaning that whatever storylines or character developments the writers had intended for those final 4 episodes were simply abandoned and never resolved, leaving the series without any proper conclusion or finale. This abrupt ending meant that the show just stopped rather than wrapping up in any meaningful way, and viewers who had been watching never got any closure or sense that the story had reached its natural end. Fact 12. Disney now owns the original negatives through a complicated series of corporate acquisitions and mergers that took place over several decades. The Walt Disney Company now owns the original film negatives to all episodes of Dusty's Trail, even though many of those episodes have lapsed into the public domain and can be freely distributed by anyone without permission or payment. This strange situation came about because Dusty's Trail was originally produced by Metromedia Producers Corporation in 1973, and that company was later acquired by Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation in March of 1986 for $3.5 billion as part of a massive deal that also included Metromedia's television stations. When News Corporation bought Metromedia Producers Corporation, they folded it into 20th Century Fox Television, which meant that Fox now controlled all of the original physical materials and master recordings from shows that Metromedia had produced, including Dusty's Trail. Then, in a more recent development, Disney acquired most of 21st Century Fox's entertainment assets in 2019, which brought the 20th Century Fox television library under Disney's control as the current parent company. This means that Disney, as the successor to Metromedia through this chain of corporate ownership, now possesses the original camera negatives and master materials for every episode of Dusty's Trail that was ever produced. However, because several episodes were never properly copyrighted when the show originally aired, those episodes exist in the public domain, creating the unusual legal situation where Disney owns the highest quality source materials but cannot prevent others from copying and selling degraded versions of those same episodes that have entered the public domain through the copyright failure that occurred back in the 1970s. Fact 13. Forrest Tucker called Bob Denver one of the great ones. Shortly before Dusty's Trail premiered in September of 1973, co-star Forrest Tucker gave an enthusiastic interview to the Los Angeles Times where he expressed genuine excitement about working on the show and heaped praise on his leading man Bob Denver, calling him one of the great ones among the many comedians he had worked with throughout his long career. Tucker, who was a seasoned television and film actor with decades of experience in both comedy and drama, told the newspaper that he was having more damn fun with this one than any of them, referring to Dusty's Trail compared to all his previous television projects, which included notable shows like F Troop, where he had played the comedic character Sergeant Morgan O'Rourke. Tucker went on to discuss the various comic actors he had collaborated with over the years, and specifically singled out Denver as being among the best at physical comedy and comedic timing, suggesting that he believed the show had real potential for success based on the chemistry and talent of the cast. This optimistic assessment came before anyone knew how poorly the show would be received by audiences and critics, and Tucker's genuine enthusiasm in the interview suggests that the people working on Dusty's Trail truly believed they were creating something entertaining and worthwhile, rather than a derivative flop. The contrast between Tucker's pre-broadcast confidence and the show's actual reception makes his comments particularly poignant. In retrospect, as it demonstrates how even experienced professionals in the entertainment industry can be completely wrong about a project's prospects, and how working on something that's fun to make doesn't necessarily translate into something that audiences will enjoy watching. Fact 14. Aired in the death slot, 7:30 p.m. Dusty's Trail aired in the unusual 7:30 p.m. time slot on various stations across the country, which was considered somewhat of a dead zone in the television schedule because it fell in the awkward gap just before network primetime programming began at 8 o'clock in the evening. This time slot was typically filled with syndicated programming rather than network shows. And while it meant that Dusty's Trail faced virtually no competition from major network programs, it also meant that the show was essentially invisible to the vast majority of television viewers who weren't actively tuning in at that specific time. The 7:30 slot was particularly challenging because families were often still eating dinner or wrapping up their evening routines at that hour, and viewers who did turn on their televisions that early were usually watching local news programs or waiting for the 8 o'clock primetime lineup to begin, rather than seeking out entertainment. Different stations aired Dusty's Trail on different nights of the week, depending on their local programming schedules, with some viewers recalling it airing on Thursday nights, while others remembered seeing it on Friday or Saturday evenings at 7:30, which created additional confusion about when the show was actually on, and made it difficult for anyone to develop a consistent viewing habit. One viewer later recalled the show being on at what they described as a strange time like 7:30 on Saturday nights, highlighting how unusual and inconvenient this scheduling felt even to people who actually tried to watch the program. This poor time slot placement essentially guaranteed that Dusty's Trail would struggle to find an audience regardless of its quality. Though in this case, the scheduling problems were compounded by the show's actual lack of appeal to viewers. Fact 15. Barely cracked top 50 before cancellation. In what might be the most surprising fact about Dusty's Trail, the show was actually reported to have barely made the top 50 shows during its 1973 to 74 season run, which was considered a fairly respectable showing for a first-run syndicated program that wasn't backed by a major network. This rating performance seems almost impossible to believe, given the show's terrible critical reception and its reputation as one of television's biggest failures. But syndicated shows were measured differently than network programs and competed in a separate category with lower expectations for viewership. Making it into the top 50 syndicated shows meant that Dusty's Trail was performing better than hundreds of other syndicated programs airing across the country at that time. And by the standards of first-run syndication, this level of viewership would normally have been enough to justify renewal for a second season or at least completion of the full 30-episode order that had been planned. However, despite achieving what should have been adequate ratings for a syndicated show, Dusty's Trail was immediately and unceremoniously canceled after just 26 episodes, without any attempt to continue production or give the series another chance to find its audience. This cancellation decision suggests that factors beyond simple ratings numbers played a role in ending the show, possibly including negative critical reception, lack of enthusiasm from station managers who were airing the program, or recognition from the producers themselves that the show simply wasn't working despite its modest numerical success, proving that sometimes even decent ratings aren't enough to save a fundamentally flawed television series from being put out of its misery.